Hello, and welcome to ScrapTV, the video forum for the ISRI and Scrap Magazine websites. I'm Kent Kaiser, your ScrapTV host, and I'm here today with Joe Pickard, Chief Economist and Director of Commodities for ISRI. Today we're here to talk about the recent John Dunham and Associates study about the economic impact of the scrap recycling industry. First off, welcome Joe. Thank you for joining me today. First, I just want to see, is this the first economic impact study that ISRI has ever conducted?
No, this is actually the second update of the original study that was conducted in 2011 by John Dunham and Associates. So it was updated in 2013, and again just updated this April.
Oh, okay. And can you tell me, why did ISRI decide to embark on these studies in the first place back in 2011?
Sure. Well, maybe a little bit first about the industry that ISRI represents.
Okay.
So we represent the for-profit scrap recycling industry. That includes scrap processors and brokers as well. And our members process everything from ferrous and non-ferrous metals to paper, plastics, electronics, tires and rubber, textiles and other recycled commodities. And because we're the for-profit segment of the recycling industry, sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to capture and measure accurately. So, for example, the Labor Department in the United States has jobs numbers broken down by sector of the economy, but it doesn't necessarily do a great job, in our opinion, at capturing the full jobs and economic impact of the sector that ISRI represents. So that was sort of the impetus behind trying to get a better handle on not just the jobs that our industry supports, but also the economic impact that we have overall.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, now, when you first reviewed the results of this latest study, which just came out about a month ago or so, was there anything about the results that was particularly surprising to you?
Well, there are a couple things. I think the first thing that kind of stood out was the resilience of the scrap industry that we continue to see today. I think based on what we've seen in terms of the health of the manufacturing industry and what we've seen in terms of commodity prices, which have a direct impact on the health of our sector, the expectation was that maybe the jobs had stagnated a little bit or actually declined along with the economic impact. And the results vary a little bit by state and by direct versus indirect jobs supported, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think that one of the more pleasant surprises was just how resilient our industry is and how many jobs we continue to support.
Excellent. That's good news. All right. Well, let's look first at the study's assessment of the industry's overall economic impact and activity. Can you tell us what is the recycling industry's overall economic contribution, and how does it compare with the previous study?
Sure. Maybe just a little bit of background. The Dunham report breaks down the economic impact into three basic sectors. One is the direct economic impact of our industry. That's the jobs and economic impact directly supported by scrap processors and brokers. And then there are indirect impacts of our industry as well. And those are the impacts created by suppliers of equipment and services to our industry. And then there's what's called an induced impact. And that is the money that is spent by our industry employees and supplier employees in the industry at large. So the combination of those three sectors, if you will, is estimated at over $105 billion this year alone. And that's an increase, considerable increase from the last study that was conducted in 2013.
Oh my, yeah, that's good news. So how much of the recycling industry's 106 billion activity, how much of the overall U.S. economy does that account for?
According to the Dunham study, that's it's less than 1%. It's about 0.7%, but that's still a healthy chunk considering the size of the economy overall and considering the fact that the U.S. is the largest economy in the world today.
Absolutely. For one industry to account for almost 1%, that's definitely admirable. And how about how our industry compares to other industries of a similar size?
Sure. In the Dunham report, they talk about how it's comparable in size to the entire data processing and collection industry, how it's similar in size to the entire automobile repair industry. And I think in previous reports we've talked about how the scrap recycling industry is actually of a comparable size to all the major professional sports franchises combined. And I think that's a little bit surprising for some folks because the professional teams in other industries have such a high profile. The scrap recycling industry doesn't always have that level of profile, but I think through job studies like this, we're trying to get the word out and educate people about just how important our industry is.
Absolutely. And how does that economic impact translate in terms of the local, state, and federal tax revenue that our industry contributes?
Sure, and that's one nice part about the Dunham study is it doesn't just give an economic impact nationally and jobs nationally, it also breaks it down by state and locality, in addition to the tax impacts, which are significant. According to the Dunham study this year, the industry is going to contribute about $11 billion in federal, state, and local taxes overall, including about $4.5 billion just in state and local taxes in the United States. And those are critically important at a time when local municipalities and governments are trying hard to make their budgets balance.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's turn now to the actual employment job numbers from the survey. First of all, can you break down how the employment figures are divided in the study?
Sure. So again, it breaks it down by direct employment, supplier, and then also by induced.
Oh, okay.
So the sort of main impact, or most direct, is obviously direct jobs, and they estimate that to be about 150,000 jobs in the United States. When you combine all three sectors combined, it's approximately 470,000 jobs that the scrap recycling industry supports.
Whoa. And how much did it quantify how much that actually translates to in terms of wages and that kind of?
It does. So it takes into impact not just the wages that are paid, but all the economic benefits. As we talked about, that's a total of over $105 billion. But if you look just at wages supported by direct jobs in the industry, Dunham estimates that on average, wages plus benefits for these jobs are about $77,000 per job, which is, these are good paying, green industry sustainable jobs.
Absolutely. Oh, that's impressive. Now, how broad is the recycling industry's reach, though? I mean, does this really reach down to all 50 states, or is it more concentrated in the heavy industrial or urban areas?
So I think there's certainly a concentration around different industrial areas that scrap processors would follow. Heavy industry wouldn't be too much of a surprise. But certainly there are scrap recyclers in every state in the country. Scrap recyclers range in size from very small sort of mom and pop operations to very large multinational corporations. But I think one of the important things to take out of this study is you can look at it not just at the state but at the local level. And you begin to realize just how important scrap recyclers are as local business and community partners within communities across the whole country.
That's great. All right, let's turn now to the final section of the study, which really looked at the exports and the jobs in that sector.
Sure.
Can you first just talk about and give us a framework for how important are scrap exports to the U.S. economy as a whole?
Well, talk about scrap exports, maybe start with as a percentage of scrap industry revenues overall. Sure. And in recent years, ISRI estimates that revenues generated from scrap exports account for about 30–35%, in some years even more, of total scrap industry revenues. So it's an increasingly important part of the economic impact of the scrap recycling industry.
Absolutely.
And I think the Dunham numbers are pretty consistent in terms of the share of jobs and economic impact generated by exports. The Dunham study shows about 125,000 jobs total supported by scrap exports. And that's an important part of our industry.
Absolutely. And that also contributes, or is that part of the taxes and whatnot that we discussed earlier, or does this sector create any of its own separate taxes and revenue?
The export portion would be included as part of the overall economic impact.
Okay, gotcha. Still on this scrap export topic, some organizations will assert that exporting scrap from our country actually kills jobs. Can you comment on that claim?
Well, it's wrong, first of all. Maybe to talk a little bit about why the U.S. exports scrap to begin with. First of all, the U.S. is blessed with the largest economy in the world, and with that comes a very large infrastructure of materials that are already in place. and that become available for recycling at the end of their life cycles. But also as our manufacturing output increases, that generates more what they call prime or prompt scrap as well. So we have a large supply of scrap that's available for recycling both domestically and overseas. Fortunately, we have more scrap really than what our domestic industry can process. And so the export markets provide a really useful outlet for that excess generation of scrap that we can't necessarily use in this country, but is still extremely valuable, both in terms of our balance of trade, but also for job creation as well. So to the extent that, as reflected in the Dunham study, exports are supporting about 125,000 jobs just for scrap exports alone, I think is a good counterbalance to the argument that scrap exports don't support jobs.
Okay, there you go. Do you have any final thoughts on the new study or the recycling industry's contribution to the U.S. economy in general that wasn't really focused on so far in our discussion?
Sure. I think, as we talked about a little bit, one thing that stuck out is the resilience of our industry. And that, I think, comes as a little bit of a surprise, especially in relation to what our industry has been going through in the last couple of years, which have been challenging market conditions, both on the commodity side and then both on U.S. manufacturing as well, which has seen some uneven growth coming out of the recession. So I think one thing to take away from that is really the resilience of our industry. Another part of the study showed that different areas of our industry in different sectors of the country have experienced different levels of growth.
Sure.
Some of the biggest states with recycling in the country, like California, for example, has actually experienced declining growth within the scrap recycling industry, which isn't terribly surprising, especially if you talk to scrap processors on the West Coast. But overall, we've created more jobs, according to the Dunham's update in 2015. Our economic impact is even larger. And I think that speaks to just how important our industry is, both for sustainable development, but also for economic growth and job growth here in the U.S.
Absolutely. Does ISRI plan to continue updating this study like every 2 years or so? Or is this an ongoing project, basically?
That's what we've been doing the last couple of years. As we talked about, the initial update was in 2011, and we'll just have to see going forward how frequently we're going to update these numbers.
Okay. That does it for this chat. Thank you, Joe, for being here with us today. And this is Kent Kaiser for ScrapTV, signing off until next time.